So the next two cycles that we need to cover are the phosphorus cycle and the water cycle. Those make up the 4 biogeochemical cycles that are most important for life on Earth. Phosphorus is an essential nutrient for living organisms. It's found in cell membranes, DNA, RNA, ATP, and ADP. And again, a cycle, it just shows the route that a nutrient takes through the environment. In nature, phosphorus is often a limiting nutrient. In other words, it's in short supply and it puts a limit on growth, particularly in aquatic and freshwater ecosystems. The phosphorus cycle is a very slow geologic process. It's important to note that there's no gaseous state for phosphorus. It's not in the atmosphere, which is one of the reasons it's quite a limiting factor. Producers need phosphorus to grow. Another thing that's important to look at in the phosphorus cycle is that fertilizer contains phosphorus. In nature, phosphorus is found mostly in sedimentary rocks in the form of phosphate ions. As the rocks weather, the phosphorus they contain slowly leaches into surface water and soils. Volcanic ash and mineral dust can also contain phosphate, though it's not really in a gas phase and it will settle down on the earth pretty readily. So phosphate compounds in the soil are taken up by plants, and from there they're assimilated into the plants to form their structure and then transferred to animals that eat the plants. When the plants and animals die, or when they excrete wastes, then the phosphates may be taken up by bacteria or other decomposers in the soil and then returned into the ground. Phosphorus-containing compounds may also be carried in surface runoff to rivers, lakes, and oceans, and then they're taken up by aquatic organisms. When phosphorus-containing compounds from the bodies of marine organisms sink to the floor of the ocean, they form sedimentary layers, and then over time, these sedimentary layers lithify into sedimentary rock that can be moved from the ocean to the land through a process called uplift, but this process is very, very slow, and the average phosphate ion stays in the ocean for 20 to 100,000 years. Take a second to draw this in your notes. Hit pause right now. So humans have an important effect on the phosphorus cycle. Most fertilizers used in agriculture and also on our lawns and gardens contain phosphorus. We have that NPK ratio that you can find on most fertilizers, and that shows you the nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus that is found in the fertilizers. So fertilizer often is carried into aquatic ecosystems as surface runoff, and then that can cause excessive growth of algae or other microbes that were limited and had that limiting factor of how much nitrogen or phosphorus was available to them. This phenomenon is the same process that we spoke of before, eutrophication. So the drivers of eutrophication can be phosphorus or nitrogen. Some algae make water taste or smell bad or produce toxic compounds, which can be harmful if you have too much algae that's growing in a body of water. But also, then again, as these algae die and are decomposed by microbes, large amounts of oxygen can be used up as their bodies are broken down, and a spike in oxygen usage sharply lowers dissolved oxygen levels in the water and then can lead to hypoxia or a lack of oxygen, which leads to death of other aquatic organisms such as shellfish and regular fish. Phosphorus dissolves into the ocean. As you have this phosphorus run off into rivers and streams, it can end up in lakes and oceans and cause hypoxic zones in the oceans or large lakes called dead zones. We looked at this in a diagram that we were describing in the book a few days ago. The number of dead zones has increased for several years. We have hundreds of them. One of the worst dead zones is off the coast of the United States in the Gulf of Mexico. We have fertilizer that runs off from the Mississippi River, and it makes a dead zone that's over 9,000 square miles in diameter. It also can produce murky waters. So if you wanted to prevent the amount of phosphorus that is able to get into our runoff, we would try not to buy detergents that contain phosphate because that gets into the water system. And also, don't be overly generous on the amount of fertilizers that you use on your lawns and gardens. So some of our solutions to these dead zones, we have the Harmful Algal Bloom and Hypoxia Research and Control Act of 1998. You won't be expected to memorize that specific law. I know that you wrote a bunch of laws down this week as part of your homework, but some of the solutions in that Algae Bloom Control Act include reducing nitrogen fertilizer use in the Midwest, applying fertilizer at times which minimize runoff, such as not in the rainy season and not when the ground is not able to soak up very much of the phosphorus and other fertilizer components like nitrogen. We can use alternative crops instead of just trying to pump more fertilizer onto an area, and manage our manure better so that we don't have a lot of the phosphorus that's found in animal excrement running off into streams and lakes like the Mississippi River. We can restore wetlands and create artificial ones, which in turn causes a buffer zone where these plants can take in a lot of the phosphorus and nitrogen before it gets into the rivers. It kind of slows that spread and acts as a natural filter or a buffer zone. We can improve our sewage treatment techniques and technologies so that we have less sewage wastes that are able to get into our water system. And those are our most important ways to prevent that. Other ways to decrease the pollution caused from nitrogen and phosphorus, which are necessary for life, but they are limiting elements, and we in turn are dumping way more of them into our agricultural regions in order to promote growth of plants, but then we don't want it to get into our waterways. So in this picture here, you see a lot of fields that are plowed, and in between these plowed fields, you can see large amounts of green, and that green is a buffer strip. So it's vegetation that's growing there. It has large root structure and just a lot of biomass or plant matter that is able to intake through the heavy roots that they have, intake a lot of those fertilizers. Another method is to plant with contours that kind of go against the shape of the land to make it so that the water runs off more slowly before it gets to the stream. So it'll take the path of least resistance, which would mean a much slower path. Say if you were going from one of these fields up here, the path is going to kind of take it with the contour and around instead of the water going straight down into the creek. Also, we want to plant cover crops, which are crops like clover and alfalfa that can help to replenish the nitrogen naturally in the soil, and also maintain wetlands, because wetlands also are going to help, like I just said, as a buffer and a way to slow down. Also, a lot of wetlands that have grasses can take in a lot of phosphorus and nitrogen, and they can grow a lot faster. So as we looked at the aspen trees the other day, they grew really rapidly at first, and then as they got larger, and the carbon dioxide was no longer a factor, the same thing can kind of happen with a lot of plants and the amount of nitrogen and phosphorus that they can take in. But with grasses, oftentimes they can grow, they have a larger window of what they can take in to be beneficial to the environment. So we want to have all these things happen, but there's a lack of funding. So who is it that that pays for different things? Who's going to pay if the farmers don't have enough crops because they didn't use as much fertilizer? Or who's going to help them with contour planting if that is to possibly take away some of the room that they did have for planting crops or the like? So another method that we have is crop insurance, wherein farmers, if their crops are destroyed by some natural event, then they will get paid. They also have certain amounts that crops go for, like corn and wheat, that allow for them to kind of know their steady flow of income.